Yeah, so my first question to you, Matt, is what draws you to the use of ESG factors and philosophies when assessing private market allocations and use of managers who specialise in that field?
Yeah, so I don't think it's just the markets. I think you've got to consider ESG factors across your entire portfolio, and private markets are different in that respect. And it shouldn't just be specialist managers who think about ESG. You know, everyone should be incorporating this. We're defining ESG considerations as financially material, then surely that's an important part of any investment process. You know, the G, governance, it's an obvious one, it's well understood. You need companies you invest in to be well run, but the E and the S, there are now many more metrics available, and they're, you know, from different staff, different providers, etc. And I think that's really well needed because it plays to that quote by, you know, Peter Drucker, who said, "What gets measured gets managed." We do need to be a little bit careful that we aren't measuring and managing the wrong things, though, and then patting ourselves in the back that we're doing a good job. I think sometimes it can be a bit like a balloon where you squeeze in on one area and it pops out somewhere else. And some of these metrics, you know, have that issue potentially. If, you know, the differences between scope 1, scope 2 and scope 3 emissions, you can squeeze the balloon at scope 1 and it pops out in scope 3. But specifically to private markets, I think the ownership structure in private equity, for instance, may well give them the ability to bring about even greater change within companies they invest in, and specifically then even greater change around ESG.
So in your view, does a herd mentality actually exist in private markets where many investors are chasing the same high quality investment opportunities?
Yeah, so I've been in and around pension schemes for a long time now and invested in private markets for all that period. So I don't see it as a really new thing, and that herd mentality into private markets. It's true, there's a bit more buzz around it over the last few years. And some of that momentum will be because of you know, lack of attractiveness at times within the traditional space. So when spreads on IG credit in the listed market are really tight, it might make sense to look at private credit for that pickup. And now there's always going to be pockets around the market that become expensive. Perhaps some might say that the more ESG friendly investments, private markets might fit that bill these days. But I've always thought that it's not just about buying the perfect company, or in this instance, the company with the perfect ESG characteristics. There can be a lot of value to be had in looking at those companies that can change towards being that perfect company or having those perfect ESG characteristics, and hopefully you'd be well rewarded for being on that journey. Again, private markets investing potentially lends itself to this, to pushing companies along that journey, given the ownership structure in private equity, but even in private debt space. I love the turn of phrase that new money speaks the loudest. And so private debt managers, they've got a real voice when they're originating private funding rather than, you know, bonds changing hands between investors in the secondary market. When they're originating new funding, they've got a really loud voice.
So what are the top 3 questions you would ask any third-party manager about how they utilise the ESG investment factors in their investment portfolios?
So even before we get into a discussion about ESG factors, you know, you need to be satisfied that investment manager has investment skill. So there's going to be a lot of the normal research questions and interrogations. But given the nature of private markets, some areas of the questioning may have more emphasis than others compared to the research process in the listed space. You know, in private markets, manager selection is more important than macro factors. So you really need a team to go in and do the due diligence on the investment piece first. Specifically looking at the ESG piece, there's really 2 main areas that I'm going to want to press on. Number 1, how is it integrated into the overall investment process? And integrated is the important word there, because it needs to not just be an add-on to a product they already have. And then the second area is going to be, what is the framework for measuring impact? So what are the quantifiable metrics to it all? I mean, you can obviously measure or see the return outcomes that you achieve from any investment, but you also in this space want to be able to see the outcomes from the ESG factors too. Great, so ESG is here to stay. And you need to have a level of understanding to not just be swept up in the buzzwords, particularly in private markets. As like I said, you can have a real impact here when you get it right. Although I hope in a few years' time, we actually don't have these ESG investment summits. We just have investment summits, and ESG is part and parcel of these investment summits, just like any other important part of the investment process.
Fantastic. Well, Matt, thank you for sharing your views. We very much look forward to seeing you at the Investment Summit, on the ESG Investment Summit on the 15th and 16th of September. Thank you for your time.
Brilliant. Looking forward to it. Thanks.